Great. Welcome, everyone. I'm Alex Quinnell-DeHoo. I was elected to the Maine State Legislature, and I currently am the president of Elected Officials to Protect America and Elected Officials Code Blue, which is the C4 portion of it. I'm so happy to have everyone here today and see our amazing panelists today to talk about defending the Toxic Substances Control Act, or more commonly known as TSCA. It is extremely unfortunate that we need to be working on this right now because these are basic protections that we shouldn't be have to take for granted, right? I know a lot of these speakers here have been working tirelessly to protect their communities and people and families from toxic chemicals like PFAS and asbestos, which we all know are just inherently bad for us. But unfortunately, there is an effort in Congress right now to roll back these protections. And for me, particularly, it hits home because as my time in the Marine Corps, one of my jobs was actually to blow open safes, and we put them in the burn pits as a safe place to blow them up. And clearly not the best thing to be exposed to. But the crazy part is coming home and then seeing the same problems and being exposed to, say, asbestos in my base in Virginia. And they actually had to remodel the entire conference room area because that's where a lot of the asbestos was, and then all our storage areas. So I dread to think the stuff that was lurking around all the gear too. So unfortunately, my story is not uncommon or alone. And so we'll be hearing from other veterans who have seen the effects and the dangers of repealing the TSCA Act in their communities and why we need to protect it. And really, we're so fortunate to have a Congresswoman, Chellie Pingree here, because she has been a champion for this for many years. Uh, Actually, I served in the Maine State Legislature with her daughter, Hannah Pingree, when she was the House Speaker, and she was really championing this work too. It was over a decade ago, right? And for a while, it was working. We passed something, and it did protect our communities. And unfortunately, now we're back protecting it again. We do think the members of Congress will do the right thing, but to let everyone know why we need to do the right thing, I'd love to introduce Congresswoman Chellie Pingree. She um, sits on the Senate Appropriations Committee, um, as well as a number of the subcommittees where she's chair, and has a wonderful farm up next to Rockland in an island where she grew up and really learned the value of protecting our community and understanding the effect it has on everyone there. So, Congressman Pingree, please take it away.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Alex. Thank you for the work that you're doing now, for your service to this country and your service as a legislator, and the fights that you fought when you were a state legislator. Yes, alongside my daughter, particularly on issues like flame retardant chemicals and so many toxic substances that we thought we had under control then. And as you say, we're still in this fight big time now. Thank you to everybody who's listening in today and the other panelists. I'm looking forward to hearing from the other panelists, and to all of you, thank you for your service. Some of you as elected officials and some of you in military service. We really appreciate it. You heard a little bit about my background. I too was a state legislator before Alex and my daughter, but I served in the state Senate and worked on many of these issues even back then in the 90s. I've been an organic farmer much of my life, so I care deeply about toxics and making sure everyone has access to healthy foods. And my interest in the environment goes all the way back to the 1970s, the original Earth Day, and a huge movement of people came into Maine to be back to the landers because we were looking for a way to live more sustainably. And I've worked on those kinds of policies ever since then. And certainly it's been a big core of the time I've spent in Washington. As you heard, I'm the ranking member on the Interior and Environment Subcommittee of Appropriations. So that is where we fund the EPA, our public lands, the Department of Interior. So we're on the forefront of a lot of these issues. And certainly in the last couple of years, it's been a huge fight. And a lot of my ideas, as I said, were shaped by, the first Earth Day, my own experiences as an organic farmer and believing in these things, but also just the state of Maine, where these issues have been in the forefront, and no more so than PFAS contamination. Maine was one of the first states to really do extensive testing on agricultural land. We, like so many other states, spread sewage sludge on our farmland back in the 70s and 80s before we really understood the dangers it could present. Some chemicals were tested for then, like mercury and lead, but PFAS wasn't even talked about. So now when farmers are starting to discover that they have these toxic chemicals on their land, it was really imperative that Maine took it on. And the Maine legislature has done an amazing job of taking responsibility for this, providing testing for farmers, assisting farmers with dealing with their own health-related issues, and also even going so far as to starting farm buybacks for those people who have put in years on their farm, but there's no current way to reclaim them. There's a lot of extensive research going on in Maine related to how can we mediate these chemicals, how can we remove them from the land, just the very kind of work that has to be done. But I'm really impressed by how Maine has moved forward more quickly than virtually any other state and invested substantial amounts of state funds in a state that's not very big and doesn't have a lot of money to spend. But that's a good example of what can be done when we really, take on these issues. Um, I know we're going to hear a lot more about TSCA today, and I'm not going to talk specifically about it, but I would just say, like so many things in Washington, this landmark legislation is under assault, and there are moves afoot to weaken it, to make it easier to get chemicals approved, to allow for more toxics in our environment, really to make it easier for the chemical companies, and to make it more difficult for the consumers to know exactly what's in the products that they consume or know what's going to be in their environment. I mean, TSCA is there for a reason. It's to give people the guarantee that they can live in a safe and clean environment. But this proposal, the proposals before us, would weaken that. And we all need to be fighting as hard as we possibly can to make sure that nothing is changed and that we only continue to strengthen these laws. As I said, my role as the ranking member on the Interior Environment Subcommittee means that we have the EPA in our sights every day and have been deeply worried about this administration's staffing cuts, policy changes, funding cuts. Right now, we'll have a markup on their bill coming up in a week, and we're battling back an enormous cut to the administration of the EPA, and that's really where we do so much of this important work. There have been other attempts to roll back protections on things like PFAS in drinking water, asbestos, toxics from chemical plants, auto emissions. I mean, you can kind of turn in any direction and see that this is not an administration that is working on protecting us in the way that they had promised. And we just have to keep reminding them what an important job and duty that is. I sponsor a lot of legislation related to these things and happy to give people copies or more examples of what we've been doing. One of them is the Relief for Farmers Hit with PFAS Act. That's a bipartisan, bicameral piece of legislation that's modeled after many of the things that we did in Maine, as I said, to support testing, mediation and research efforts, and even look to how do you support farmers who are stuck in this difficult situation, which often happened long before they were ever on the land. This sewage sludge was spread or other kinds of toxics came into the environment, and how do we help them now? I have another bipartisan bill on the Healthy H2O Act that's about testing and treatment related to drinking water. And every year I work on trying to get more funding into the EPA or USDA budgets to support research or the kinds of support that we need to have. But I can tell you that even at the federal level, or I can say at the federal level, we have not done enough as Maine did in 1 year. So we still have a long ways to go to both build up the funding support for this and to make sure the policies are on the right side. One thing I thought I might describe is just kind of the environment right now, because I think that's something that you're all watching, and we really appreciate the important work that goes on in the states. I still believe, as a former state legislator, states are the laboratories of democracy, and the more action we can have there, the more important the more likely we are to be successful. It reminds my colleagues that this is going on in their home states, and it brings the issue to the forefront in a way that people understand extremely well. We've been in a fight. I've been in a fight for the last year related to Bayer, which used to be Monsanto, and the glyphosate chemical. That company has been looking for a preemption to prohibit any state from regulating glyphosate and also to get immunity against health-related lawsuits, neither of which are popular with the American public and neither of which should be allowed. They've taken this to the Supreme Court. The federal government, this administration, has used the Defense Production Act to increase their immunity and the production of glyphosate. And we've had this attempt by the Bayer company through members of Congress to put legislative language into the Farm Bill, into the Interior Bill that I work on, over and over again, trying to use some kind of vehicle to get this immunity and preemption from the states. I got it out last year in our funding bill, and I was able to work with a lot of people who got involved in government this year because of the MAHA movement, people from both sides of the aisle who were really worried about toxic chemicals. And we really went in full force when it came to the Farm Bill about a month ago. We managed to get about, I think it was 73 Republicans to vote for it, my amendment, or an amendment that I ended up working with on a bipartisan basis, so a Republican carried it, which was fine. I just wanted to get it to pass. But we got 73 Republicans on the floor to vote for it, which was a huge, huge success to get that language out of the Farm Bill. So I'm kind of skating over all that a little bit to keep it short, but that's just a really important change that we've seen, is this bipartisan interest of people who are saying enough of these toxic chemicals. Where do we fight back? And that's true of PFAS, of chemicals like glyphosate. I think Vermont just passed a ban on paraquat. So the mood is right out there, and I think we can win a lot of these battles, but we kind of all have to work on it together and be fighting on all fronts, because these are enormous lobbies working against us. I was told during the Farm Bill negotiations that have been going on for the last few months, there were 53 lobbyists assigned to this particular amendment on the Hill, and they were spending about $9 million. So we know the full force was against us on all of that. But let me just wrap up by saying, there's a lot of things that we can all be doing right now related to these things, whether there's actions going on in your state or you making sure that your member of Congress knows that you're highly aware of this, or the organizing that has to happen. I thought I would mention that yesterday was the birthday of Rachel Carson. I was at an event related to her. She wrote Silent Spring, I think in about 1961. And I think that shaped a lot of my early environmental views. It was all about the overuse of DDT in our environment. And she was really on a one-woman crusade to help people to better understand in that era how we were treating chemicals as if there was no side effect, there was no impact on the environment, there was no accumulation in your body. They were just, if it wasn't toxic and didn't kill you in the moment, you were going to be just fine. Obviously, we've learned a lot more in the ensuing, decades, but her bravery and standing strong on these kind of issues is what brought us the EPA, what got us the preservation of the bald eagle, which was almost extinct because of DDT. And we kind of need that level of a fight again. We thought that we'd won a lot of those battles back then. We thought when we formed the EPA, it would always be on our side. And I can say it isn't always anymore. And we have to keep it working for the people, and we have to keep it making sure that we have a clean environment to pass around to our children and grandchildren. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but I feel really fortunate to be in the fight, and I'm very glad to be doing this with all of you, because I know you're working hard in your home states and municipalities, and I look forward to finding ways we can work together to continue to win. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And thank you for really protecting us behind the scenes. Many probably aren't aware of the work you were doing tirelessly to get those 17 colleagues of yours on board. I know that takes a lot of work, even to get a few folks to step up. And because this really should be a bipartisan issue and nonpartisan issue that everyone gets along with, because it really does affect our health. And we know originally the veterans are affected by Agent Orange, and which led into glyphosate and
Right.
Monsanto and now Bayer. And they really spend massive amounts of funding for their own interests, sadly. So, let's get more of a bigger picture. And I'd love to introduce our next speaker, Suhani. She's the Senior Manager of Federal Affairs for the Environmental Defense Action Fund. And she brings over a decade of experience in environmental law and policy. She formerly worked with manufacturing trade associations, state level policy advocacy, and was an attorney with the University of Maryland Law's Environmental Law Clinic as well. So clearly qualified to give us an overview and experts on what's happening here. So please do jump in and ask questions in the chat. I'll take a look at them and we can answer them when it's appropriate at the beginning or the end or in the middle. And love to hear what you have to offer. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. And thank you, Congresswoman Pingree, for all of your work and leadership to protect public health and ensuring that EPA stays funded to fulfill its authority to protect human health and the environment. Greatly appreciative for you being here. Also want to pass along a thank you for EOPA for putting this together and allowing a platform to raise the importance of TSCA. It's so incredibly important. So thank you for doing that. And lastly, just wanted to thank the honorable elected officials who are on this call. Thank you for sharing your stories and bringing to light what is happening in cities, municipalities, and communities. I am going to talk a lot about like very broad level federal policy, but what's happening on the ground is truly what matters, and that is what we need to bring to light. If it is okay, I'm going to share my screen, and I'll run through a presentation that hopefully isn't too long. Let's see. Are folks able to see my screen? Okay.
Yep.
Lovely. Yep. Great. I'll try and put it in presenter mode. Okay, so today I'm gonna just go through a very broad overview of the Toxic Substances Control Act, which is our nation's bedrock chemical safety law. And the reason we're bringing this up today is because it is currently under threat. So the Toxic Substances Control Act is a very broad statute, and it covers many, many things. Its primary purpose is to protect human health and the environment. And there is a baseline standard that the EPA has an authority to prevent any unreasonable risk to human health or the environment when a chemical goes onto the market. It's important to note that the Environmental Protection Agency, under the Toxic Substances Control Act, regulates the full cycle of chemicals, meaning it starts from manufacturing to its disposal and everything in between. And it has a really, really broad jurisdiction. It covers nearly all chemicals, but it does not include pesticides, food chemicals, drugs, cosmetics, or personal care products. We often say that TSCA touches everything except for stuff that you either put in your body or on your body. But there's just a few examples here of what it includes, and that's things like cleaning products, electronics, your furniture, construction material, production facilities, and then plastic products. A lot of things that are in your home and around you. And many of these toxic substances are very prevalent in military sites, including PFAS and TCE. So the major components of TSCA are kind of bucketed into the different sections in how the law exists. So the big buckets include the new chemicals program, which is exactly what it sounds like. It looks at the new chemicals that are coming onto the market. EPA reviews these chemicals to ensure they're safe, and then they're able to go into all the things that we have. Existing chemicals look at chemicals that are already on the market, and I'll provide some history around why this existing chemicals program exists. And then there's a testing authority, which allows EPA to require testing for certain chemicals. And there's also information collection. So this would require companies to report their chemicals, and there's more transparency around which chemicals are going through the EPA databases. All in all, this is to show that TSCA is a really comprehensive statute. It touches on chemicals that are on the market, chemicals that have been on the market, the testing of chemicals, and the data collection of chemicals. So, a little bit of history on TSCA. For quite some time, starting in the 70s to 2016, TSCA was largely dormant. And the reason this kind of dormancy existed is because EPA didn't have the full authority to really look into and regulate chemicals. New chemicals were allowed to enter into the market with minimal information and without a lot of consideration to human health impacts. There was no existing chemical regulations that really existed. So chemicals that were already on the market prior to 1976 were not really looked at. And EPA did not have authority, or very rarely had the authority to test chemicals. So from 1976 when this law passed, it largely tied EPA's hands. There wasn't a lot of authority for them to fully use this law and protect human health and the environment, but they did so with very, very limited capacity. Um, so what happened in 2016, there was a major reform that TSCA underwent, and this was a largely bipartisan agreement that happened in both the House and the Senate. Environmental groups came together, the chemical companies came together, health groups, just a number of folks who were invested in looking at this law all came together to rethink how can we better manage chemicals. And a lot of the recognition that kind of came to fruition up until 2016 was the recognition that TSCA wasn't working to its full ability. A lot of people were getting sick. There were a lot of cases of exposures to communities, to veterans, to pregnant women, to children from really dangerous chemicals that were in folks' backyard or in the items that we use. So there kind of came this pivotal moment where some change needs to happen. This change came in 2016, and the sections that you see here are the ones that I mentioned earlier. These are the big programs that came out of the reform: the new chemicals program, the existing chemicals program, the testing authority, the reporting authority, but also EPA is now required to consider vulnerable populations as well. And this includes populations like women, pregnant women, children, elderly, and communities that live near facilities that manufacture or produce chemicals. The existing chemicals program here looks back at all of the chemicals that were grandfathered in prior to 2016. So all of those chemicals that went through from 1976 up until 2016 are now already on the market. What the 2016 reform does is it allows EPA to go back and prioritize some of the most dangerous chemicals that have already been on the market and consider guardrails that would limit the use of these chemicals or ban them entirely. A pretty known example of the existing chemicals program is trichloroethylene, or TCE, which was recently banned, but now there's some litigation and some back and forth on this rule that has happened over the past year. But TCE was one of the chemicals that went through the existing chemicals program. So recent accomplishments, as I mentioned, some of those really, really bad chemicals like asbestos, methylene chloride, TCE, and PCE all underwent different forms of restrictions, everywhere from limited use to complete bans. A lot of these are under attack currently under this administration. And now there's also a stricter review on new chemicals before they enter the market. So I mentioned in that very first slide that EPA now must determine that a chemical does not pose an unreasonable risk to human health or the environment prior to it entering the market. That standard did not always exist. It was something that came out of those 2016 amendments and is truly the foundation of the reform that happened in 2016. So what's happening right now? There has been a political moment that has occurred since the beginning of 2025. Between the shift in Congress and the administration, there has been severe pressure in Congress to reform the Toxic Substances Control Act. This is primarily coming from industry, manufacturing, chemical companies, and other large companies to expedite their chemicals and get across the finish line quickly within the EPA. This is incredibly problematic because, like I said, back in 2016, this was a really big bipartisan reform. Everyone came to the table to talk about this. Right now, the only folks that are on the Hill knocking on doors to try and open this back up are industry. And they have a very vested interest in why they would want to do this. So there are two discussion drafts in the respective chambers. There is a House discussion draft and a Senate discussion draft. These are discussion drafts, meaning that they haven't been formally introduced. There isn't a sponsor behind this, but these did come out of the respective committees' majority leadership in the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House and the Environment and Public Works Committee in the Senate. Both drafts were written in a partisan fashion. This was not an inclusive process from what we understand. Very dissimilar to what happened in 2016, where there was a lot of work across the aisle. And a lot of these changes, I'm sorry, excuse me, one second. Got a frog in my throat. A lot of these pushes are occurring because this is now the 10-year anniversary of TSCA. And with that 10-year anniversary, something called the Fee Authority is up for expiration. What the Fee Authority does is it allows EPA to collect fees from industry when they submit new chemicals, and that will fund 20% of the operations of the new chemicals program. Industry is claiming that because this fee authority is coming to its expiration point, it allows kind of a relook at this law. They're kind of claiming that, oh, because the authority is expiring, we can open the law back up to interpretation to see whether any significant changes need to happen. There we go. So the House discussion draft was introduced earlier this year. There was a subcommittee legislative hearing that went along with this discussion draft, but it rolls back some major provisions of the 2016 amendments that were passed. Industry was claiming that this is taking a scalpel to the law, making minor changes, but it really cuts across 9 different sections and guts many of the fundamental provisions of the Toxic Substances Control Act. Oops. Primarily, this could set up a rubber stamp approval process, which means that if a chemical is not thoroughly reviewed within 90 days or EPA can't come to a decision within 90 days on a chemical, it automatically would go onto the market. It also invites industry to play a much larger role in reviewing its own products, which creates a major conflict of interest. And it severely undermines EPA's ability to protect people from the worst chemicals that are already in use. And ultimately, this discussion draft would really limit EPA's ability to test chemicals before they enter onto the market. So what I like to say is that what this discussion draft does is it ties EPA's hands and it asks EPA to swim. It makes it really difficult for EPA to do their job to protect human health and the environment. This is just a quick flag that again, the Energy and Commerce Committee held a hearing. A lot of the Democrats on the committee focused on the public health impacts, how EPA has been underfunded and reshuffled this year to really take away their scientific arm and leg in reviewing these chemicals. And then I also linked an EDF House draft as well that goes into a quick analysis of the House discussion draft. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. There is also a discussion draft on the Senate side. Very similarly, it dismantles many portions of TSCA, but this one in particular focuses on the new chemicals program. As you can see, it rolls back that affirmative safety decision that was so pivotal in the 2016 reforms. It creates a tiering system, which could allow new chemicals to enter the market without adequate review. It has broad exemptions and loopholes. It has that shot clock that I mentioned, which was that 90-day review period or automatic approvals. And again, it allows industry influence in the science and self-selection for peer review of their own chemicals, which would allow a major conflict of interest. Um, Another just note is that both discussion drafts tend to redefine some really critical definitions established in TSCA, including conditions of use and what's considered to be an unreasonable risk. And what this would do is allow things like irritation, corrosion, flammability, to not be considered an unreasonable risk when EPA is reviewing a chemical. So this is really problematic, especially for workers who work in these facilities and deal with these chemicals every day. And this is also just a note that the Senate held a legislative hearing back in March. Very similar sentiment to the House. There was a large focus on the underfunding of EPA during this administration, the reshuffling of its independent scientific research arm, and how EPA just doesn't currently have the capacity to do the really important work that it's meant to do. So in addition to kind of stripping EPA to its bare bones, you're also now proposing to make it harder for EPA to do their job and dismantle a law that would make EPA's job way more difficult than it needs to be. There's also, again, linked a bill analysis of the Senate discussion draft as well. I think these are my major points. I know that I went through a lot and I probably went over time, so I'm very sorry. But if there are any questions around the policy, I'm happy to answer any questions. And I'm so sorry that my throat has been acting up during this presentation. But thank you all so much for giving me the time to get into the weeds and talk about TSCA.
Oh, thank you. That was very informative and very clear, so I really appreciate it. We do have a couple questions popping in. Just as time-wise, Congresswoman, do you have time to do it after the presentation's coming up, or would you prefer to do that now?
I can do it later. I'm going to listen to everybody.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, in that case, I'd love to introduce Layer Macy Beaty of Beaverton, Oregon. She was a U.S. Army combat medic who served in Iraq and really has advocated strongly for veterans' causes both at the state and the national level and is critical in passage of a law that prioritizes veteran-owned businesses and impactful changes to the HUD ruling for veteran housing as well. So, Mayor, please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex, for inviting me today. I'm Lacey Beaty, the very lucky mayor of Beaverton. I am also the only known mayor in the country that's married to an active duty service member. So for over 20 years, my family has continued to serve. And so my role as a military spouse has led me all over the country to talk about impacts to service, having served myself and now as a spouse to that. I'm kind of where the rubber meets the road. The Congresswoman's right that states are the incubator of good ideas. And if that is true, cities are the place where the rubber meets the road. And if the EPA has anything to do with it, we won't be able to regulate it as it's coming to our own communities. So having spent my career in public health prior to being the mayor, I was the director of school-based health centers for a federally qualified health center here in Oregon that served migrant farm workers. So people that were, picking our food in the field and where we're at. I think it's really important that we're talking about this. I am a proud U.S. Army veteran. I'm also on the burn pit registry, and so is my husband. And it is like a dark passenger that you can never let out of your own vehicle. I'm constantly worried about exposures that we've been exposed to in other countries because of the lack of regulation. So it is beyond comprehension to me that in 2026 in the United States of America that we're allowing lobbyists to enter a building and determine what our future is going to look like. What does this look like at the local level? When we're talking about kids in school-based health centers, we're talking about where they spend the majority of their day. I was constantly coaching and talking to families about vaccines and the need to have them, what they were doing, where they're spending their day. And as the mayor, I make rules and regulations around building and our water and what goes in it, and if there's fluoride in it, and all of these things that we're trying to work with the federal government to meet the moment. As a mayor, quite often, we don't want other levels of government telling us what to do. But in this case, this is incredibly important to us that we able to all consistently operate with the same base level of knowledge. Your health determinations should not be determined by your zip code. If you live in a city like mine where I take public health very seriously, your kids are going to be protected. I wouldn't say that about every city in the United States. So this is one of the few times that I think having a federal government that is deeply invested in health outcomes is incredibly important. What we're seeing right now, you know, I mean, we could all talk all day about the federal government and the rollback of health and what that means. But when we are suggesting that Tylenol is the reason that kids are expressing autism symptoms, we have a huge issue in this country that we need to kind of come together. I think veterans and EOPA are a great group to talk about this. We experience health outcomes that most of the population doesn't experience. We are very lucky. Lucky's might not be the right word. We earned our care through the VA, and what the VA gives the veteran community is a tracking source. In my company alone, 5 of the people I served with have all passed away of very rare cancers. If we were out being seen individually in the community, there would be no through line to that. So we have that in the veteran community because of our extreme levels of exposure. But what do average Americans have? They're not going to have that same sourcing. They're not going to have that same understanding. What they expect is a government that protects them. And every level of government truly needs to understand how we're operating. You know, for us, we have a lot of brownfields. We work with the federal government all the time when we know there's been exposure to groundwater into the dirt. We have coffee shops now that sit on top of sites that used to be gas stations. We have to be very diligent to make sure that young people in our community are not exposed to these very toxic chemicals as they're sitting on the ground. So I'm so grateful to be part of this conversation. I know that we're not going to be able to build clinics fast enough to meet this demand if we're not regulating it at the federal level. So I think it's incredibly important that the Congresswoman is here. I think she has an army, so to speak. And sorry for those that served in other branches that weren't the best one, like the Army. But you have us at your disposal to put us in, Coach. Like, we fought on the steps of the Capitol for the PACT Act, and we're watching it be rolled back. So what you have is people that are deeply interested in this topic. And I heed your advice of reaching out to our members of Congress. I was just texting my 2 members of Congress saying I was talking on a panel with you today, and what can I do to help them make sure that they're in the right place? And I, as a mayor, truly believe in bipartisanship. It is the currency of the realm in local government, and super impressed that you're able to bring people across the aisle on this. But it's going to take all of us helping you push this up a hill. So thank you for including me today. Happy to answer any questions about local government impact.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I will take the bait and then move on to the Navy, which happens to be have the best bases, even if they do get PFAS contamination from
Right.
all our ships and planes. But um, speaking of which, our next speaker is the Mayor Pro Tem of Alameda, California, Daniel Ramos. And he spent over 15 years in the Navy, completing 3 combat tours, and he was a small business owner, as well as was appointed the commissioner, which then led to him being elected to the council and then eventually mayor pro tem. And he's been working tirelessly, particularly in his area, because they have a military base there of the contamination. And really would love to talk to you about what's happening there and what we can do about it. So, Mayor. Oh, Mayor
Thank
Pro
you,
Tem.
Alex. I appreciate it. And yeah, you can see if my bags, hopefully my bags don't look too bad here, guys, because I have been working tirelessly back and forth, DC, Sacramento. But first and foremost, thank you for the opportunity to be on here with a panelist and speak a little bit about Adelanto's story. Mayor Lacey, you were spot on, and I wanted to get up a couple times and clap, right? You almost had me wanting to move to Beaverton, Oregon, until you made the Army comment, then you lost me there. But no, seriously, you hit it on the head, and it, I want to share a little bit about my passion and why I'm passionate about the Toxic Substance Control Act and how it's literally hitting home here in not only in the city of Adelanto, but in our entire region, the high desert area, which encompasses a lot of the Mojave Desert, Victorville, Hesperia, Apple Valley, and here Adelanto as well. We have to make sure we're fighting for this, right? And Congresswoman, to your points, thank you for being on the front lines. Thank you for doing everything that you're doing. EOPA, thank you for creating and providing a platform for us to come up and speak. Because if we lose it, we all are impacted. We're all impacted. There's no, I've never heard of a Republican or a Democratic water well. We're all drinking. We're all going to lose if we lose this act. So I want to just share a little bit about Adelanto's past, so that we can better understand on why we're at where we're at right now with PFAS and asbestos, in our environment, specifically in our waters, and then talk a little bit about how we're going to move forward, what the plan is for Adelanto moving forward. I'm going to try and speed through this. Sorry if I'm a little bit fast, but Alex said I have 4 minutes, so I'm going to try to fit it in 6. Okay. Founded in 1915. Founded in 1915 by Earl Holmes Richardson. Earl Holmes Richardson was the inventor of the hot point iron. So whenever you guys are ironing your uniforms or ironing your clothes, the iron started here in Adelanto. Earl Holmes Richardson in 1915 was approached by General Electrics, which was around at the time, and was approached to purchase the patent for the electric hot point iron. He sold the patent for $75,000 back in 1915. Do the math, that was probably about $1 million back in the days. He then drove up 2 hours up the Cajon Pass and purchased the 56 square miles where we're at today, known as the city of Adelanto. The unique thing about Mr. Richardson was his idea for the city of Adelanto was to develop the first planned community in one of the first planned communities in Southern California, but more importantly, a community that would care for veterans coming back from World War I. A lot of them that were exposed to like mustard gas or different types of other chemicals, would have respiratory problems, and he wanted to create a safe space here in the city of Adelanto. And the reason why he chose Adelanto was very rich in water because of the Mojave River. We had an unlimited amount of water, and the water was very clean and clear and bright. But more importantly, we had a lot of agriculture here in the city of Adelanto, in the high desert, believe it or not. We had a lot of pear orchids, apple orchids. We had grape vineyards. We had a lot of green here, so he thought it would be a great space to help veterans here. Although his full vision was never accomplished, his planning efforts did lay the foundation, purpose, and future vision for the city of Adelanto, and that's how we wanted to continue moving forward, we were incorporated in 1970. So let's fast forward now, present, and what's been going on in the city of Adelanto and how we're affected by PFAS, asbestos, and some other chemicals. So we are rapidly growing. For the last couple of years, we've been one of the largest growing cities population-wise in the San Bernardino County, which is the largest county in the country. So people are coming here at a pretty quick rate. So we have to get these issues under control. The reason they're coming up here is because the cost of living is still affordable in the high desert. Believe it or not, here in the high desert, you can still buy a home for $350,000, $400,000. Down in the LA, lower IE area, you're not touching anything for under $1 million right now. So in 1941, the beautiful Air Force, shout out to our Air Force, George Air Force Base was commissioned here, bordering the city of Adelanto and the city of Victorville. It was later decommissioned in 1992. And for any of you who either served in any branches that served, around any type of air bases or around any type of aircraft, you already know what comes with aircraft, right? You have to fight fires. And how do we fight fires? We fight fires with AFFF. And what's in AFFF? What's in that foaming agent? Tons and tons of PFAS chemicals, right? So in 1992, when the air base was decommissioned, it converted over to Southern California Logistics Airport, a major logistics and aviation hub. So we went from an air base to an airport. And what do both of them have in common, right? Aircraft. So again, it didn't help that we went from an air base to an airport. It just actually added to the problem. This is where you'll find, in the AFFF, like I mentioned, you'll find the massive amounts of PFAS. Cities with nearby airports, air bases, or any facilities with aircraft on them, chances are there's PFAS in your environment, whether it's in your soil, whether it's in your water. It might even be in some of the fruits, vegetables, or greens that you're actually eating, right? A Congresswoman, you talked a little bit about, your farming background. I'm sure you'll agree with me when, sometimes these chemicals don't actually kill the plants. What they do is they attack the roots, right? And now when you're attacking these roots, these chemicals are going into the fruits, the vegetables, the greens that you're eating. So now you're eating this stuff, and it's scary because you can't even see, you can't even notice it. So please, 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 if you're a city that's surrounded by any type of airbase, airport, or anywhere that has aircraft, please take the proper steps in identifying if there are detectable amounts of PFAS in your environment. George Air Force Base was placed on the EPA Superfund list in 1990 due to severe multi-decade soil and groundwater pollution. The Air Force has identified the base as a major site for ongoing contamination assessment and remediation. Health effects, guys. I'm sure we're going to hear a little bit more about this later on in the webinar, but health effects of PFAS exposure: reproductive and developmental complications, immune system weakness, respiratory complications, cancer, right? Liver and kidney stress, and more. San Bernardino County is 38th, is ranked 38th out of the 58 counties when it comes to cases of cancer, right? It's pretty high, specifically breast and prostate cancer. The rates here in San Bernardino County, a lot of them are in the high desert area, Adelanto, Victorville, Hesperia, Apple Valley. The cases are significantly higher here in San Bernardino County than the California average. So it makes you think about, where are these cancers coming from, right? And the scary part is that there's thousands of PFAS compounds, and their toxicity levels can vary, determining exactly which PFAS causes specific human health effects and what levels is an active area of scientific research. So the truth of the matter is we really don't know, right, what PFAS, what it's actually causing, right? It's still being experimented with and looked into. I want to pause really quick and just talk a little bit about my service to my country and how it just all ties into why this is really important to me and it's passionate for me. I took an oath, as we all did, right? I took an oath to serve our country with no expiration date. I don't remember an expiration date being on our oath, whether you retired, whether you got out honorably, whether you discharged. There was no expiration date when we recited our oath, right? Our sailor's creed in the Navy ended with, "I proudly serve my country's Navy combat team with honor, courage, and commitment. I am committed to excellence and the fair treatment of all." The fair treatment of all. That line right there, the way that sailor creeds end, I have lived by that ever since I took that oath. The fair treatment of all. Currently, there are places with better water than others. Is that fair treatment of all? There are homes right now with cleaner, and brighter water coming out of their faucets. Is that fair treatment of all, right? Nobody on this webinar should have more access to better water than anybody else. That's not the fair treatment of all, right? So think about your oaths. Think about, what we rose our right hand to. And the same commitment that we had serving our country has to continue to exist when we're serving our cities, our counties, our communities. Some might even argue that protecting home is more important because we're talking about protecting our parents, our grandparents, our children, and protecting our children means protecting our future. So speaking about future, and I'll wrap this up, what are we doing about it? What can we do about it as individuals, as municipalities? I'll share a little bit about what Adelanto's doing and what I'm doing personally. For myself, I made sure to position myself on different boards, committees, and anywhere that I can position myself to where I can actually make a difference, right? Perfect example, I sit on the Southern California Association of Governments. I've been the vice chair for 2 years now of energy and environment. We represent 191 cities, 6 major counties, a dozen plus tribal governments, and 19 plus million people. For the next 2 years, the next year and the year after that, I'll be the chair, right? So I want to make sure that I'm involved in the decisions that have to do with what's coming in, when it has to do with energy and environment to Southern California. I'm ensuring that I'm continuously educating myself on water seminars from the well to a civic well, anything that has to do with water, I want to continue learning about, right? And I also am the regional council member for District 65, which oversees all of the high desert. So Adelanto is just not my responsibility. I'm responsible for the water, the energy and environment for all the 5, 6 surrounding cities around the city of Adelanto. So ensuring that we're positioning ourselves in places where we actually can make a change and not just talk about the change or complain about the change. When it comes to the municipality, right, Adelanto, I can't stress enough the federal relationships, the strong federal relationships that we have to have, not only with our electeds, our assembly members, our senators, and our Congress members, but with those departments that have the funding that can help us with some of these solutions, right? The EPA, the Department of Energy, the Department of Interior. One of the reasons, I'll share with you really quick, one of the reasons that I will forever, I will bend over backwards for the EOPA, and they can count me in on everything. I told Alex the other day when we were on a Zoom, I said, don't ask me to volunteer for anything. You just tell me when you need me to show up and what time you need me to show up, and I will be there, right? 3 years ago, I attended an event that they hosted, and that, to make a long story short, that led us to a little over $4 million of funding that we were able to get to help with our wastewater treatment facility, right? So do we have those strong relationships with those federal departments to ensure that when we go ask them for money, like we're not just showing up one day asking them for money. No, we're creating that relationship and then asking them for money. We are currently testing all of our well sites continuously. We have a $15 million request out with the federal government to specifically attack PFAS issues here in the city. I was just in DC last week, and it's looking very promising. Small wins through relationships with our assemblymen in Sacramento. We are going to be able to provide water filtration systems for all of our rooftops in the city of Adelanto. And I'm not talking about the water filtration system that just goes on the faucet, talking about the big one that goes into the garage that filters out the water, like really, really filters out the water. Again, that comes through relationships. More importantly, what we started doing is making sure, and I'll give you an example, making sure that what we're building, and I think somebody touched on this earlier, what we're building, we're only 20% built out in the city of Adelanto. So we're developing a lot. We want to make sure that these materials that we're bringing in are free of these chemicals as much as possible. Perfect example, our city council meeting was yesterday. We approved we're turfing out one of our parks football fields. We made sure that we checked with the manufacturer of the artificial turf that there were no materials in there that had any types of traces of PFAS, because I didn't know until about a few weeks ago that a lot of artificial turf has PFAS chemicals on it because of the way they have to shape the blades and do the blades of the grass. So making sure that the stuff that we're bringing in, the materials that we're bringing in to build the city of Adelanto are free of these chemicals, right? So those are just some of the things that I wanted to share with you that what we're doing. We also hired a new water consulting company, Woodard and Curran. They're here specifically looking at PFAS issues. I think Congresswoman, I think you touched on it as well. In 2024, the EPA rolled out 2 major regulatory measures. One was the National Primary Drinking Water Regulation for PFAS. The EPA has already listed certain requirements that we must meet with aggressive timelines. We're implementing or looking to implement granular activated carbon treatment system for the removal of PFAS. So in closing, guys, I know that was a lot. I'll leave you with this. Water is life. 100% water is life. If we want to protect life, then we must protect our water, and it should be everyone's responsibility and duty to protect both.
Cool.
Thanks, Alex.
Well, thank you very much. We definitely honor courage and commitment and the fair treatment of all.
Yep.
That's really what I think everyone here adheres to, these value sets, and really believes in that, because we want to protect our communities so we can thrive together.
Sure.
And one of the folks who have been tirelessly aiming to protect his community is Craig Minor. He was an Air Force veteran, chemist, and a law graduate. And sadly, his family has suffered from the exposure to PFAS. And it's really inspiring to see your writing and your work tirelessly around the U.S. To educate others about this important issue. So, Craig?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Alex, for the opportunity to make this statement, not only on behalf of my family, but all veterans. I like the Navy creed, but I also like the battlefield creed of we leave no person behind. We have a lot of people who have been harmed by toxic chemicals on the battlefield, the Cold War battlefield, and they're just being ignored. And we need to. Part of the reason why I do this tirelessly is even when I want to hang up the hat and just hang out with my 10 grandchildren who live 8 miles around me, I'm reminded that I still have fellow warriors laying on the battlefield, and so we just trudge on. Uh, you already introduced me. I'm a retired Air Force, obviously. I was a bomber pilot, research pilot, an acquisition analyst with a BS in chemistry and a Juris Doctor. And I'm here to share my family's story, a story that should never have happened. From 1986 to 1990, my wife, Carrie, and I lived and worked at Wordsmith Air Force Base in Michigan. For over 4 years, our family, along with everyone else on base, drank, cooked, showered in water contaminated by colorless, odorless, and tasteless PFAS from firefighter foam. The contamination came from firefighters routinely dumping AFFF waste on the ground just 500 yards upstream from the base's main drinking water wells. Official records show levels reached as high as 43,000 parts per trillion, over 10,000 times higher than today's EPA safe drinking water advisory. That is just 4 parts per trillion. This foam, 3M's light water, was invented by the U.S. Navy with the help of 3M, then sold by 3M, then distributed by the DoD, and released by the Air Force across the entire Wordsmith landscape for 23 years. That was from 1970 to 1997. The same thing happened at nearly every military installation worldwide, and then similarly in twice as many civilian locations. Our family's story is just one of hundreds of thousands of families poisoned by PFAS from light water. PFAS was first measured in the Wordsmith groundwater in 1998. That's part of a doctoral study partially funded by the EPA. So the EPA has known about this for a while. In 2002, 3M stopped making light water because of the health risks. In 2008, the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, that was the name back then, found massive PFAS contamination in the groundwater, abandoned fire hydrants, and old water tanks from when the base was operational. In 2019, my blood tested 17 times higher than the national average for PFAS, especially PFHexS, a signature chemical from 3M's firefighter foam. Our son Mitchell was born at Wordsmith Air Force Base in Oscoda in 1989 with severe cerebral palsy, quadriplegia, microcephaly, and major seizure disorders. He was tube-fed and lived in a wheelchair and hospital bed his entire life in our home, and he passed away just 6 years ago in 2020, at the age of 30. Doctors had only given him 5 years to live. His profound handicaps were consistent with severe environmental poisoning, and I know it was PFAS. We chronicled our family's journey with Mitchell in our book, Overwhelmed, a civilian casualty of Cold War poison, which is also available on Amazon. So there's my slide. My own health struggles also began at Wordsmith in 1989 while Mitchell was still in the womb. I was hospitalized for a week with mysterious prostate issues and had a large tumor removed from my back. Today, I live with an enlarged liver, a large spleen, and large prostate, poorly functioning kidneys, neuropathy, and serious heart diseases. I have multiple tumors removed, unexplained heart arrhythmias, quadruple bypass surgery, and tandem stents placed in my widowmaker artery. That was just 6 months ago. My cardiologists say I have a heart of an 80-year-old. All my issues are consistent with PFAS epidemiological studies. And by the way, I never smoked, I don't drink, and I ran every day until my early 50s. And that's probably the only reason I'm still here to tell our story. PFAS wasn't unique to Wordsmith. In 2015, the DoD tested drinking water at 63 military installations. PFAS was found at dangerous levels on multiple bases, some in the thousands of parts per trillion. This is in the drinking water. In 2022, the National Academy of Sciences published a major report detailing the serious effects of these chemicals, and I saw Daniel had made mention of that. In a 2024 study, veteran blood serum samples from DoD's Serum Repository, that the blood samples were drawn in the 1990s, tested well above the 1990 national averages reported for PFAS, especially PFHexS. And just 5 months ago, 3M finally stopped making PFAS entirely. just 25 years to decide 3M certain PFAS and light water were bad for U.S. citizens and military, and another 25 years for 3M to stop making PFAS altogether. Today, the DoD still does not acknowledge the health harms from PFAS to veterans, their spouses, their children, including those in the womb, civilians working on base, firefighters, and the surrounding communities. So this is exactly why defending and strengthening the Toxic Substance Control Act is so important. The 1976 TSCA was supposed to protect Americans from dangerous chemicals before they poisoned our water and our bodies, but for decades it failed, especially with persistent chemicals like PFAS that were widely used on military bases or with very little testing and oversight. We must fix TSCA so it actually requires meaningful safety data on chemicals before the release. I think all agree there. Also, Congress needs presumptive conditions for veterans exposed to PFAS at places like Wordsmith. We need real cleanup, and we need stronger laws that puts American citizens first. So that wraps it up. Thank you for letting me share our family story, and I'm ready to stand with all of you to strengthen TSCA so no other American family has to endure what ours has endured. God bless y'all.
Oh, thank you, sir. Really appreciate you sharing all that. I'd love to transition to Josh, who's our Solon Center Fellow, working tirelessly on this work. So if you could just give us a highlight of some of the calls to action we can do, and then we'll take a couple of Q&As.
Yeah, sounds good. So let me go ahead and see if I can share my screen just to pull this up very quickly. Just one moment. Oh,
You're good
actually,
to
I
go,
think that
Josh.
Dominic is pulling it. Dominic, are you pulling it up? Okay, perfect. Thanks. Yeah, so just to give a very brief overview of the ways that folks can get involved. The Environmental Defense Fund has put together this very comprehensive toxic exposure map so that you can track to see what the exposure levels are looking like in your community, whether they be PFAS, asbestos, or other toxic chemicals. And we've shared the link right here, and we'll also be following up, as I said, with this so that we don't have to take all the notes and everything right now. You can, of course, also email your members of Congress or send a message via the Act Now platform through EDF's Action Fund. Again, the link is right here included. You can also speak out on social media, again, tagging your member of Congress. You can do that through either a post or a short video content. And if that's something you'd be interested in, you can feel free to contact me at the email address listed there below for more information. You can also write a letter to the editor for your local newspaper. Again, I'm happy to connect with anyone who might be interested in taking that route. And you can also meet with your local congressional offices while they're available in your district. And once again, if any of those, speaking on social media, writing a letter to the editor, or reaching out to your local congressman or congressperson in their office, if any of that appeals to you, more than happy to help out with that, or direct you to my colleague Ramona as well, who can also help out with making those connections, so that way we can actually get some forward momentum moving to keep TSCA safe and strong. So with that, I will yield my time back to Alex and Dominic.
Well, I'm happy you're already using the legislative terms of yielding the time. So from there, we have more questions than we have time. So what I can do is I'll aim to summarize a couple of the questions into, I think, a bit more of a generic question, starting with Congresswoman Pingree, really focusing on what are when it comes to PFAS and other dangerous chemicals, there's obviously a link with our food systems and our water systems and how it's harming us greatly. There's a link to the harmful factors in the EPA not having the funding it needs as well. And that's a battle I know you've been fighting in Congress. And then relating to our safety. So overall, when it comes to the funding side and the interaction of how this is bigger than just PFAS, right? It's our food systems, it's our water systems. And so it really affects everything. And this also sets a precedent beyond just TSCA for what can be repealed for others. So could you comment on the intersection between the food, water, and our safety, as well as what resources we need to be able to help the communities like Daniel's who's suffering from it right now?
Sure. And Suhani made a great point about like what is covered under TSCA and what isn't. The challenge is that when people worry about toxics in their environment, they worry about it all. They don't really say like, well, what piece of legislation or what subcommittee is that covered under? And so, sometimes on the legislative side, we try to figure out how to deal with something. But to most people, it's just like, I'm freaked out that people are getting cancer at younger rates. I'm not sure about, issues that my kids have, or, there's just so many things out there that people are concerned about today, and they see it as a growing problem. And I think what we have to do is capitalize on that fear that people have, and want to know, like, what should I do? Like, how can I fight back? And part of it is to say you got to fight on all levels. We got municipalities, and it was great to hear from, mayors and people who have had, different kinds of experience about how this impacts your own community and how you have to fight on those fronts. But when it comes to the legislative front, equally important is what goes on in state legislatures as what goes on in Congress, and helping people to understand, that you can fight back. And sometimes it's just a matter of expressing to whoever represents you, I'm paying attention to these things and I want to know how you're regulating them. And it certainly impacts our food supply, because PFAS, while it does come under TSCA, unlike, it's not a pesticide or an herbicide, but because it was used in areas where it's often either from, a military base. There are cases where dairy farms were impacted because they were close to a military base and it was used in firefighting foam, as you heard people talking about, or it was spread in sewage sludge coming from, some kind of water supply. So it gets into the land, it impacts the food that is grown there. I mean, we have farmers who have personally been impacted by it. So it has a hugely expansive range. And in one case in our state, there was a dairy farmer whose cows had a high level of PFAS in the milk. So then it's spread throughout the food supply until somebody actually discovers it. And until states do, wide scale testing, and now it's done state by state, you don't even know who's likely to have it. And in many states, they don't want to start the testing because once you do, then you get people freaked out about the food supply. So, that sort of impacts people. You don't know what to trust. So absolutely a big part of our system. So the other couple of things that you asked me were, what's the role of the EPA, and at a federal level, we're in very bad shape right now because we've got an administration that has cut staffing tremendously. And as Suhani said, you really need that staff to do the kind of work that has to be done under TSCA. So they've already kind of, stopped the implementation of it in a way, even though they haven't gotten the legislative changes that they want. So the funding there, the staffing there, helping people to understand that when you cut the government, you're often cutting the very things that impact public health or the food supply. It's not some distant bureaucracy that you think spends too much money, and helping people to basically understand where that money goes and the importance of scientific research. Frankly, these days, you just have to help people to understand the basic importance of science, because we've become an anti-science kind of era, and you just have to fight back on those things and help people to understand this is why you should care about this. And then one last thing I saw in the questions, I'll just throw it in there, is like, how do you do this cross the aisle thing? And that's really critically important. And I have to say, even though we're in this difficult environment, I've worked on these issues in Congress for 18 years, and before that as a state legislator. And I think some of the reasons we got some traction this year fighting back on the Farm Bill and fighting back on this is because of the people who got involved in government because of MAHA. And everyone has a MAHA chapter, or people who believe in this idea of make America healthy again. They're usually associated with the Republican Party, but this is such a nonpartisan issue. Everybody's worried about getting sick. And we were able to work with a lot of them, the groups like Moms Across America, or Glyphosate Gal. I mean, there's a lot of people who are posting on the internet every day. And if you start to follow them and sort of see how they're talking about it, but also enlist them, they've been working in state legislators to fight back on state legislatures, fighting back on these issues. And it's a really good alliance. And PFAS is one of their top issues. And when I meet with people on the other side of the aisle, I say, look, we're not going to agree on everything, but let's form an alliance on the things we both agree on and really care about. This is about your health, my kids' health, and the people we represent. So I think there are huge opportunities right now, and we just have to take advantage of that. But this is an America that is very worried about our food supply, about why are we getting sick, and our big chemical companies, getting to make all the rules going out into the future, and how do we fight back?
Cool. Well, thank you, Congressman. That was very well said, and you encompassed my next two questions in one. So, excellent job of bringing it to home and together. Um, we do have a question directly for Shani. When we talk about these particularly dangerous provisions in the House and the Senate markups, do you want to call one or two of them out that really people should be aware of?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Oh gosh, there's so many bad things to choose from. I will say a handful of things that come to mind are the weakening of that affirmative determination standard that is that safety standard that was established in 2016. So I think I mentioned kind of early on in my slides that EPA has the responsibility to make an affirmative determination that a chemical does not pose an unreasonable risk to human health or the environment. That standard is very much at risk. And if that is weakened, there is a potential of really dangerous chemicals entering into the market without a thorough review. Another one that I would note was that allusion to a 90-day shot clock, where if a chemical is not thoroughly reviewed or not adequately reviewed within 90 days, or if EPA can't come to a determination within 90 days, it can automatically enter the market. That is really, really dangerous. One, because those automatic approvals could potentially, one, allow dangerous chemicals like PFAS, like TCE, like vinyl chloride into our environment. But two, in addition to this 90-day shot clock, the amount of data that now EPA needs to prove that a chemical is harmful has increased. So what EPA has to prove has also increased, which takes more time. So they're kind of, these discussion draft provisions are kind of nifty, because what they're doing again is tying EPA's hands to make it harder for them to do their job, but then putting them on a clock and saying, well, if you don't do it, it's going to be automatically approved. And then another provision I would state is there's kind of these comparative risk assessments that are being considered in this discussion draft. And what this would do is kind of allow safer chemicals to enter the market or be prioritized in their reviews. This is incredibly problematic. And I state this because just because the chemical is safer doesn't mean it's safe. Gen X was considered to be a safer chemical to other PFAS alternatives, but everyone has heard and known of the dangers that are associated with Gen X. So I would just say that provision is incredibly problematic and really, really dangerous. Like we don't want to see these alternatives pop up onto the market that still cause cancer, that still cause health harms, and that will still impact our communities. So I would say those are some big provisions that are within these two discussion drafts.
Well, thank you. Clearly, the above all is definitely the answer to this one in many ways, but really appreciate you singling out some of the big dangers. And lastly, I'll just round out, since our audience here are mostly state and local elected officials, for Congressman Pingree, what can state and local folks do in lieu of what the federal government's action to really work with the EPA and make it happen? Because we know you're working tirelessly to protect us in every way you can, but ultimately the administration controls the EPA right now. So at the state and local level, what do you think we can do to support your efforts, and at the local and state level to protect our communities?
Well, again, I mean, each of you have a pipeline to your member of Congress, and the budget cuts that are being implemented at the EPA right now. I mean, they started this year, the administration proposed a 52% cut. We've got it down, it won't be that big, but it'll still be huge. And the staffing cuts have already happened. The elimination of the research side of the EPA and some of the enforcement. I mean, it's huge. So number one, helping people to understand the state impact of that. For those of you who are state legislators, we're cutting a lot of the funding, or they're proposing to cut it, that would implement things like, sewer and water grants, things that really fund a lot of local infrastructure projects. That's huge for municipalities right now. Some of that clean drinking water stuff, it's all being cut if this administration has its way. So making it clear that that's going to just increase the property taxes for local municipalities. It's going to make it harder to balance the state budgets. And if you don't have the staffing, all these things that TSCA is meant to do can't happen anyway, because there's nobody there. And that whole idea of the 90-day shot clock. Well, it's sort of a perfect setup. You say, well, we get automatic approval in 90 days if you guys don't do the work. Well, if there's no one there to do the work, it doesn't happen. And that's consistently been the issue. So, I mean, it's a horrible, horrible setup. So number one, just spend as much time as you can using your voices and your very authoritative voices, because you're already elected officials. And so you have a better pipeline to your member of Congress than most people do. And second, I'd say, again, these state and municipal laws really matter. And one of the things that they're trying to do with glyphosate, and they'll continue to do it in other places, is to preempt your ability to do that. Maine has about 30 state and municipal laws regulating glyphosate, things like it can't be, sprayed on a soccer field where your kids play or other things. Well, fighting back on that until we have really safe laws at the federal level, you can't ease up on any of that. And you have to keep pushing on it. And I know they've been trying to put these preemptions in a lot of state legislatures, and people have been showing up and battling back, and they've lost a lot of these state legislative battles also on immunity from health claims. So you guys have enormous power. You have far more power than we do usually. So, I still value my days as a state senator. It was good work, and it's important work, and you can get a lot more done in a shorter period of time and make a huge statement. So I appreciate being able to talk to you and to continue to work with you. We're happy to share the kind of ideas and information that we're working on anytime, and continue to work with you.
Cool. Thank you, Congresswoman. With that, we will round out the webinar. I do want to very much thank our colleagues, the Truman National Security Project and Physicians for Social Responsibility, for helping us work together to put this webinar on, and of course the EDF's Action Fund, for providing the deep insights that we need to be aware of what's happening, so we can protect our communities. Thank you everyone for joining. If we did not get to your question, we'll aim to write these down and get to you personally. Like Mr. Wolf, we didn't get to the Sound Science Act, but there's a lot more to discuss, and we will continue the conversation. So please do reach out, and thanks for attending today's webinar.
Thank you all.